All right, well, I'm going to get things started here. First, I just want to welcome everyone to the July 2013 edition of BALLE's Local First webinar series. My name is Martin Forge, and I serve as Spreading Solutions Manager here at BALLE. Today, you're joining a unique group of leaders from across North America who are committed to localism, and we're really delighted to have you with us. So thank you all for joining us. I know we have a bunch of folks on the line here, and I still think there are some folks that will be joining us in the next couple of minutes, but I will get started. I want to start off by turning things over to Mikel Davila on our team to review a bit of technical housekeeping for today's webinar, and then I'll hop back on and provide a few reminders about the webinar series and introduce our topic and speakers for today. Take it away, Mikel.
Thanks, Martin. Hi, my name is Mikel Davila, and I serve as the Spreading Solutions Associate at BALLE. I'm going to review a bit of housekeeping, as Martin said, provide a few reminders about this webinar series, and then hand it back to Martin to introduce our speaker today. If you have dialed in by phone but have not joined us in the webinar room, please find a link in your reminder email from our registration system, iLink. Because of the number of webinar participants, we have the phone line muted this morning. If you have a question for our presenters at any time during the webinar, please type your question into the public chat window. We'll hold most questions to the end of the webinar when we have time set aside for a moderated Q&A. If you have technical difficulties at any point during the webinar, please note this in the chat window and I will send you a private chat to help get you sorted out. The private chat will show up as a new tab to the right of the public chat window in the top right corner of your screen, which will flash red once the private chat has been initiated. Immediately after this webinar, you will receive a short survey. This will help us evaluate and make improvements for future webinars. Your participation is greatly appreciated. Also, after each webinar, we email all attendees and registrants a link to a full recording of the webinar, along with presentation slides and a copy of the questions from the chat. Please watch for these materials in an email from me over the next few days. If you have any other questions about registration or technical aspects of the webinar, I'd be happy to hear from you afterward. And with that, I'll hand the floor back over to you, Martin.
Great. Thank you, Mikel. And now a bit more about our Local First webinar series. This series features innovative strategies at both the business and the network levels that effectively make the case for local and result in more buying and thinking local first. We know that driving demand for local products and services is a critical piece of building the localist movement and taking Main Street mainstream. Locally produced goods and locally owned businesses have received a surge in support and awareness over the last several years, thanks to many of the Think Local First campaigns around North America. We continue to support this movement through showcasing effective models, campaigns, policies, and programs that expand local ownership and shift purchasing towards locals first. This webinar is the next in our series on local procurement. Buy local campaigns and consumer education are still essential tools in the localist workbench, but bringing the localist movement to scale requires setting our sights on some of the biggest consumers out there: governments, large corporations, and anchor institutions. These entities represent an enormous sector of the economy, and tapping into this demand could represent millions or even billions of dollars of income for local businesses in your community. Now that we've covered various models for localizing procurement across sectors and with many kinds of institutions, we're going deep on local food procurement. Localizing food systems is common work for localists, and it's also an area of local procurement with more history and greater traction than a lot of other forms of local purchasing. Our Local First webinars overall are focused on tools that you can take home and try out right away. Each month we feature a case study with a Local First innovator like Jim, who we have with us today. Someone who has developed and piloted a working model for getting more people, businesses, governments, or institutions to buy local. The innovators will present their model, and we allow time for dialogue and questions. We suggest that you treat these calls as an opportunity to bring together a group of business owners, social entrepreneurs, local government officials, policymakers, and network leaders in your community who are interested in a particular topic. After listening to the webinar, you might spend an hour discussing with your group the applicability or relevance of this model in your community, and then come up with some next steps for action. We encourage roundtables like this so you do not have to pay extra per attendee on the same webinar line. And now to introduce today's topic and speaker. So after learning about two nonprofit social enterprise models for advancing local food procurement, and a hearing from a pioneering procurement officer at Emory University, we'll dive into another example on the front lines, this time a for-profit model for advancing local food procurement. Today's speaker is Jim Epstein, Chairman and Co-Founder of Blue Ridge Produce and Chairman of EFO Capital Management. Jim brings an interesting mix of expertise to the question of local procurement. He's a real estate developer and runs a diversified investment and consulting company. From this background, he steps into the world of getting local foods to local and regional buyers, from retail to institutions. Jim also believes that nonprofits have really led the way with local food procurement and have built a foundation from which businesses like his can work to help local food procurement get to scale. We want to give Jim a big thanks for sharing with us today, and with that, I will turn the webinar over to Jim. Take it away.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? I hope so.
Yes, I hear you loud and clear.
Good. Okay, just wanted to make sure it's working. Well, thank you very much for the invitation, and it is a real pleasure to be able to tell you a little bit about the work of Blue Ridge Produce and how we hope to actually move the needle on moving the food system to embrace more local produce. So as Martin suggested, I did start in real estate, and that actually was where I first got engaged in the whole concept of local food, amazingly enough, through a real estate development in the north end of Culpeper County. It was located in the heart of the Virginia Piedmont region, and I really wanted to embrace what the local jurisdiction's comprehensive plan stated, and that statement was they wanted to concentrate real estate development in village centers and preserve the rural and agricultural nature of the region around them. One of the challenges there, and is the case in almost everywhere in these rural areas, is that the zoning regulations, when you move from the comprehensive plan to the zoning regulations don't allow you to do either one of those things, either to concentrate development or to preserve the rural and agricultural nature of the region around them. I also came to realize that the drivers of the primary way to preserve the land was not going to be ultimately through changes in the in the zoning regulations, because those could change with the next group of board of supervisors who could say, well, we want more development and we want to be able to spread them wherever. But ultimately we needed to figure out a way to help serve the farm community and keep them on the farm and keep those farms productive. So with this, in thinking about what I call the software of this community, I was looking at what could be the economic drivers of this. And it was clear to me that with the large number of artisan farms in the surrounding area, that would there would be a great opportunity to provide a center there in this village and ultimately support those surrounding farms. I turned to an organization called familyfarm.org to help me with a feasibility study on this. They said, let's expand your scope to look at the whole Northern Virginia region. And that feasibility study, if you're interested in finding it, if you go to familyfarm.org, they have this study and several other very interesting studies that are worth looking at. I think there's a couple that they've done on, for Illinois and here, but there's a lot of information in this one, which you'll see here about the industry as a whole. U.S. fruits and vegetables are a $71 billion industry in 2010, up 12% over 2007. Expected to continue growing over the next 5 years. Similarly, organic fruits and vegetable industry, obviously not quite so large, but is growing at an even higher rate than the general growth in fruits and vegetables. Interestingly enough, the U.S. is a net importer of fresh produce since 1998. 15% of our vegetables are imported, 45% of our fruits, and that's up 50% since 1983. And I would say the primary driver of that is due to year-round demand. So one of the challenges that we have is that we've become so used to eating all kinds of stuff at any, all year, that the supermarkets and the big service providers, know that they want to get all of those things year-round, and the only way to do that is to look at the southern hemisphere to make up for that difference. Some reality checks on where we are. So of the total crops that we plant, only 3% of them are actually in fruits and vegetables. 97% of what's grown in the United States are commodity crops. Obviously corn and soy and wheat are the biggest three. Nonetheless, it's growing. And there's 70,000, we left that as zero there, sorry about that, 70,000 fresh market vegetable farms in the United States, 113,000 fruit and nut tree farms, and those are up 15% and 9% respectively since 2002. A little note on the sales outlets. So of all of this food that's in the system, 45% of those food sales happens through grocery stores, and 19% of those sales go through restaurants, schools, and institutions, and then the rest of them are a wide variety of other sources. So let's talk a little bit about the DC area. The total food industry, that's the restaurants and the food service and the supermarkets and everything, is $16.8 billion a year in the larger Washington metropolitan area. And excuse me, when I looked at the statistics, that's probably a number that is true for any large metropolitan area. And so when we looked at that, we said, boy, there is definitely a way to make some money in that. Now, the other thing to note is that of the $16.8 billion, sorry, let me go back. Of that $16.8 billion food industry, I would say it's in the low single digits that is actually local. Nonetheless, if we could figure, and this is really what drove us on this thing, we shift 1%. A 1% shift in the $16.8 billion is $168 million. There has got to be some opportunity in that to make some money. And I'll get back to why we structured it as a for-profit business. The other major thing that we found was that the students have been instrumental in pushing the what I call the institutionalization of local. Moving it into forcing the larger institutions to think strategically about getting enough food, local food, so that they can serve large numbers of people. And fundamentally, what they need are three things. Obviously, everybody wants quality. That's a given. But the other two things is that they need quantity, enough to serve all of their students in that school, and they want it consistently so that they can plan their menus and get the quantities that they need on a regular basis in order to do that. So my hat's off to all of the students and all of the universities everywhere that are pushing that. So for those of you who are involved in local systems, continue to work with the students, because they are extraordinarily valuable in this process. The other thing that I think was so helpful both in the DC region and I think everywhere across the country, is there are a lot of 501c3s that stepped into the breach to look at what was going on with the, to make connections between the farmers and the restaurants and CSAs and farmers markets and all kinds of things like that. There were really incredible number of 501c3s that really, I think, set the stage for the shift that we're now seeing. A lot of it was focused on basic consumer education, basic farm education, figuring out how to get their produce from their farm into the system in some way, shape, or form. Similarly, farmers markets and CSAs have been hugely important in all of this. Again, educating people about the nutritional value and freshness and taste of fresh produce. Similarly with the CSAs. At the same time, we just have to realize that the farmers market and the CSAs represent, again, on an overall basis, probably less than 1% of the total food system. So it's tiny. And then finally, I would say that the high-end restaurants were instrumental. They were the ones who really decided to go out and figure out how they were going to get local produce to be able to use them, recognizing that they were extraordinarily valuable. And in the DC area, my hat's off to Nora Pouillon, certified organic restaurant, I think one of the first, and O'Connell from the Inn at Little Washington were really instrumental in making that happen. But it happened at the high end because the cost associated with making individual purchases from individual farms and using them in their system was so was expensive, and it was not an efficient way to do it. So it started there, and now again we're beginning to see that it's getting pushed down so that more and more everyday restaurants want to get into the local food scene and source more of their produce from there. But the challenge that they have is that they can't afford to go out and try to find their own farms to supply them. They have to figure out a different system. So our current food system, and how did we get here? And I'm not going to dwell long on this. This is probably familiar to all of you, but clearly on fertilizer, after the Second World War, we converted our bomb-making operations into fertilizer-making operations. We pushed industrial agriculture, and especially with Earl Butz and the Nixon administration, we really pushed for that shift to industrialization. The development of the interstate highway system and low fuel cost allowed for incredibly inexpensive transportation. So it no longer really mattered where stuff came from because the transportation costs were so nominal. Temperate climates in the south, so Florida and California, were able to dominate the food production. And in fact get in as many as 3 crops a year, and basically forced out areas in the north and the northeast and further north from being able to compete. And finally, I would say that it was such an incredible focus on price and not on nutrient value or freshness, which is what the 501c3s and the farmers markets and the CSAs have begun to address. So we're seeing the popular shift happening. So there are, and then in terms of getting the produce to customers, there are 3 fundamental ways that we do that. Obviously through the supermarkets, as you noticed earlier, about 45% of them come that way. Food service companies, about 19% of them. And then distributors and other ways, of course, the CSAs and the farmers markets, but they're pretty small overall. So as we look to figure out how to address some things, we felt that it was important that we wanted to move the needle. Again, we had found that there were a number of small mom and pop operations connecting a number of farms to a number of restaurants, for example, or sort of aggregating, sort of becoming farm clubs, so you move beyond just the CSAs, and a number of other ways to do it. But all of those in the scale of things were pretty small, and we wanted to operate on a larger basis. We also didn't want to compete, which meant that we were going to try to figure out how to cooperate with the existing distribution system. So in this area, we not only, and I think as you guys have across most of the country, Cisco and Sodexo and Aramark and U.S. Foods all, get produce to their customers. And then locally, the two biggest distributors are Keeney and Coastal Sunbelt. And these guys have been at it for decades, if not generations. And there was just no way that we felt that we could compete against those guys. I know, for example, Coastal Sunbelt has almost 200 trucks that go out on a daily basis. They've sort of organized their routes so that they're extraordinarily effective and efficient. So we didn't want to compete with them, but we wanted to figure out how to cooperate with them. We felt that the biggest missing piece was on aggregation. In other words, it was actually gathering the food from those farms. And in particular, there are a number of large farms that were being completely agnostic about who they were selling to, and we wanted to figure out how to make it so that they were dedicated to selling to us so that we could in turn sell their produce locally. Location, location, location is essential. We basically had two options here. A lot of people think, well, let's put our aggregation or collect our food in the cities. We didn't like that idea because we felt it was more important to be close to where the source was. And in fact, as we get into what happened, you'll see how effective it was to have that. But really, the movement of getting produce from the farms to our facility in order to plug it into the distribution system, it was much more important for us to be out in the rural areas. So we're about an hour and 10 minutes outside of DC. So we also wanted to move away from a not-for-profit model and really make sure that we were dedicated to making this a financially viable operation. Again, when we looked at a 1% shift of $168 million, we figured if we had the discipline, it should follow. There's got to be money to be made in that. We also felt that the education was there. The existing 501c3s had done a tremendous job in setting the stage for us, and now it was time for those for-profit businesses to move in and do it. We'd also decided that we wanted to be a values-based for-profit business, so we were really, truly dedicated to preserving the rural landscape, to preserving the farming opportunities, so we put that into the incorporation documents. Now, I think somewhere we'll get into later into the structure that we set up for this, and I'll get back to that. We found that our relationship with farmers was to be incredibly critical. Farmers are kind of ornery folks, and I'll tell us a short story here. So when we first got started, in December of 2010, we organized over a number of weeks a big gathering of the largest farms in our region to sort of tell them what we were thinking about doing in the aggregation and the things that something of our business thesis here and what we wanted to try to achieve. And at that meeting, Kevin Kirby, who was the largest, had the most amount of land in production, got up to speak and says, "Well, I hear what you're saying, and I can't do the southern drawl that he has," but he went on for about 10 minutes talking about all of the different problems that he saw and the ways that it wasn't going to work and so on. And I'm sitting back there getting more and more depressed about what he's saying, and I'm thinking, geez, everybody's listening to this guy. And afterwards, I asked this other farmer who was one of our consultants about it, and he says, "Oh no, Jim, he was really excited about what you're doing." And I go, "Well, I didn't hear that." He said, "Well, listen, who was the first one to show up at your meeting? It was Kevin Kirby. Who was the last one to leave? It was Kevin Kirby." He said, "He is telling you all of the things you need to do to make sure that it works for him." I go, "Okay, well, that's not what I heard." Well, then the next day, we went to visit another farmer, and the first thing that farmer said was, "Wasn't that Kevin Kirby excited about what you're doing?" And so I said, "Oh my God, they speak another language." Well, the postscript to all of this is about a year later, after our first year, we went out to meet with the farmers to ask them how we did, and they kind of went, it was okay. And I turned to my partner and I said, "Mark, it sounds like we did really well." So, and we knew we had arrived and we had done well by them because they invited us to have some moonshine with them in the shed in the back of their facility. So that was, a critical component for what we did. So this is our facility. I won't dwell too long on it. The big 35,000 square foot warehouse is where we do our aggregation. The 11,000 square foot warehouse is currently rented out to another party, but ultimately we would love to do a commercial kitchen operation there using our local produce. And all the other buildings there you see are greenhouses. There's approximately 80,000 square feet of greenhouses there. We just signed a lease with an organic grower. And I think I'll get back to that a little bit later. So here's our structure. We decided we wanted this structure as an LLC because we wanted to split out the liability of the potential liability in our distribution with the trucking and all of that from the main asset, which was the property, because we own the property. So we set them up as two separate LLCs. So we do aggregation and production under Blue Ridge Produce, and then the real estate and the buildings are in the other LLC. As we grow, we can add more LLCs to this. I think some of you who are in business will probably be somewhat familiar with all of this operation. This is a little bit dated. This is what we originally intended to do when we started out. Let's see. So what did we learn from this? And I think the biggest thing we learned is a new term that we've coined called FOAG. And it basically means that when we found that when we went to U.S. Foods and Cisco and almost every single large distributor, they would love what we were doing, especially those who serve the universities. Oh my God, the students all want this. This is perfect. This is just what I need. They gave glowing introduction to their sales staff, and said, and we zipped through the vendor applications. We thought, we went home. We said, God, we're so happy, man. This is just we're just ready to knock the cover off the ball on this, and nothing would happen. So, and then we would go back and we would work it a little more, and eventually they might start picking up. But it takes a very, very, very long time to nurture that relationship. So FOAG is something that everybody's going to go through, and what FOAG stands for is frigging order already, God damn it. because we were saying this to Mark and I were saying this to each other all the time, and so it took too long to say it because we were saying it all the time. So we've abbreviated it to FOAG. But this is a huge challenge. Is that they say that they love it, but it's a different thing when you actually get down to working with them. I talked about working with farmers already. I don't think I need to go on that again, but that was absolutely critical. I think all of you know about the process of staffing the business, finding the right people for the right jobs, knowing that when you have to jettison somebody and because they don't quite fit, you just have to move on that. Shift from local to regional and back to local didn't work. So we thought that in the summertime that we would do all local, and that as we moved into the winter, we would move south from Virginia to North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and then back up the coast, but really making sure that it was regional and that we could still deliver our commitment to getting it from the field to the customers within 24 hours. And that didn't work at all. Did not work. It just, when people wanted local, they wanted true local. So that was a huge and painful lesson that we learned in our first winter. And then we quickly shifted to identifying as many greenhouses as we could in Virginia. And then over the last, this is our third summer, so over those summers and those 2 winters, we've expanded to 130 farms that we source from, and approximately 40 acres of greenhouses. So that was a really interesting lesson for us about local. When people want local, they want local, and regional just doesn't cut it. Transparency is so critical, and I'll give you a great example of that. When we were working with the preferred produce who wanted to lease our greenhouses for organic production, we were not certain of whether we could make the pricing work for everybody, so that the grower could make their money, we could make our money, which was basically 15% for the delivery and logistics and marketing and all of that kind of stuff, and that the end user could sell it at a price that worked for him. So what we ended up doing is just having 5 or 6 conference calls with everybody on board and just being upfront about what our expectations were and how much we made and why we needed to charge those and how all of that was going to work. And a long story short on that, it worked very, very effectively. Similarly with our farmers and our customers, that transparency is hugely important. And similarly, I would say that being a for-profit business was hugely valuable to our farmers in particular, because all of them are out there looking to make some money, and they liked it when we were out there making some money as well. They said, great, I really like working with you. And similarly, our vendors, our customers liked that we were a profit-driven and really knew the importance of delivering on what we would say we would deliver, and we weren't going to use an excuse. We didn't have to have excuses for what it was, because we knew that if we screwed up on serving our customers, that was it. And now I don't think all 501c3s that had stepped into this aggregation operation are that way, but a number of them are. And in fact, some of our customers said they moved away from those 501c3s because they simply didn't have the focus on customer relations that they knew a for-profit business would have. And then finally, the other lesson learned is be opportunistic, but it has to fit in with the existing system. And I think those of you in business should be fairly familiar with this. So these are so these are some of the greenhouses that we're working with. The one on the left is really an extraordinary one that allows us actually to be starting to supply romaine lettuce to all 159 Chipotle restaurants in the Mid-Atlantic region. And then the one on the right we wish we were sourcing from, but not yet. But that's if you can imagine, that's a 40-acre greenhouse. And I'm convinced that with the need for consistency and quantity, we're going to be seeing more and more greenhouses. So if you're out there looking for food sourcing, I would definitely make greenhouses a part of what you look at. And quite frankly, the other benefit of greenhouses is that they use typically about 15% of the water that outdoor growing uses. So again, this is Coastal Sunbelt, one of our primary customers, and on the left. And one of the things that we found happened by being out in the rural area is that Coastal Sunbelt has customers on the other side of us from where their central warehouse is. So they did backhauling, which means that we don't have, they have the trucks already in operation, they have the truck driver, they have insurance. We don't have to have a truck, we don't have to have a truck driver, we don't have to have insurance for that, for as much as we would if we were doing all the distribution. But this is hugely valuable to everybody because they know they don't have to pay a drop charge, we don't have additional costs, we can reflect the not using trucks in our pricing, and it creates a much more efficient system. And US Foods is the same, Cisco is the same, Coastal Sunbelt is the same, and I think when we get started with Keeney, probably the same there. On the right is my partner Mark Seal, sitting on the right talking to farmers one winter, and this is just before we get that lovely invitation to have moonshine with them. So as I mentioned, the future of Blue Ridge Produce and local aggregation I think is going to, greenhouses are definitely going to play a role in them. But we're going to look to expand our family of farms from 130 to 200, 300, 400. We think that there's a lot of them available of all different sizes. So we're looking also at ancillary businesses. The demand, there's quite a number of small kitchens, small commercial kitchens, small mom and pop operations, and all of them have had the same problem that small farms have had, which is how do we get that produce from their farm to their customers? And the commercial kitchens are in the same boat with what they make, because it takes a tremendous amount of time for them to run around, do the marketing, and to figure out the logistics of how they're going to get their items to their customers at the time that they need it. So we think that there's a great opportunity for us to simply layer this onto what we have. And similarly, I think there's huge opportunities with both meat and dairy. The challenges with that are regulatory and maintaining the cold chain from farm to customer. And again, the capital costs associated with that are going to be higher, so we felt that it was important to start with the fruits and vegetables. So that's all that I have. I'm happy to entertain some questions here. Any other comments?
Great. Well, thank you, Jim. I have a bunch of questions here from the chat window and from some others that came into me. First, I'd like to get a little bit more of an idea of kind of who your other customers are. I know you mentioned that you sell to some of the local distributors like Sunbelt Produce, and that some of the lettuce from that one farm goes to Chipotle and to possibly some other high-end restaurants in the area. But can you give us an idea of some of the other customers that you serve?
Sure. Yeah. Well, we have decided not to do any retail sales, so we don't go to any individual restaurants Now I mentioned, for example, Chipotle. We actually will not be distributing to them. They have a contract for distribution with Keeney, who was the second largest distributor in the Washington metropolitan area. So we negotiated directly with Chipotle, which Chipotle does for everything. And then they in turn just turn to Keeney and say, okay, we've negotiated this deal. You need to get it into our system and deliver it to all 158 of our restaurants in the Mid-Atlantic region. We do also have a number of restaurants that come to us and say, oh, we love what you're doing. We want to buy from you. And our first response is, so, this is great. We'd love to serve you. Who's your distributor? Who supplies you? And then we try to do it through there, because ultimately we find that that's going to be most valuable for them and the most efficient way to do it. And ultimately I think it should cost only nominally above how they might be doing it otherwise. We also have Whole Foods. We work in the Washington metropolitan area. There's 25 Whole Foods stores. We've had an interesting challenge with Whole Foods, and we thought it was going to be a lot easier than it was. But the interest in local in the Washington metropolitan area is overshadowed by the interest in organic. Most of the customers at Whole Foods are way more interested in the organic than in the local. Now they'll buy local in season, which again, as I expressed earlier, was one of our challenges. But they want organic is what they want. And Virginia is a particularly difficult area to grow organically because of the humidity. It's easier to do organic further north where you're not having to deal with humidity issues. And fortunately, we'll be able to start addressing that with the grower that we have that will be using our greenhouses. So that was a big challenge. But what we do is to go to those Whole Foods stores that have produce buyers who are actually interested in local. And it all depends on who the store manager is and who the store manager is hired to be their produce buyer. That's it's very particular to the personnel within those Whole Foods stores. We've gone to Whole Foods Central Hub, which serves all 25 of those individual Whole Foods stores, and the biggest challenge we have there is to do it with both the quantity and the consistency there. And we think with greenhouse productions, they're going to start paying more attention to that. But until we can do them in find organic growers for them that are at the scale, we're going to have a very difficult time with Whole Foods. Again, it was a big surprise for us, but I think we could do that. Now, in terms of the universities, again, they're all interested. We work with Bon Appetit, and so our strategy with them is they have, I think, 6 or 7 different universities that they're providing the food services to. And in that particular case, they don't have a central warehouse, so you've got to go to each of those universities to deliver the food there. So in this particular case, what we've decided to do, since we didn't want to be in the trucking industry, we've hired an independent contractor to deliver that food for us, and we just simply set the price of what we sell it to them for to include the delivery cost. So they choke at a separate delivery charge. So we say, okay, it's fine, we won't charge you for the delivery, and it just gets baked into the price of their thing. Now eventually we would like to do is to get them working with Coastal Sunbelt or Keeney or one of the distributors so that we can simply get it to them through the existing distribution system. And finally, we're working with the whole hospital chain. Innova Hospital Systems has really made a huge commitment to sourcing 10% of their produce from local sources, and eventually they want to get it up to 50% over the next couple of years. So again, foot in the door, we're going to their individual restaurants to get that, into their individual hospitals to get it there, and eventually we'll move away from that. And we're doing what the distributors do, which is sort of map them out so that we make the distribution as efficient as possible, and in the same area. And finally, I would say we're in conversations with Harris Teeter. They want to sort of move into the space. And I guess if you look at the hierarchy of supermarkets here, and from the top, we have Whole Foods, of course, and Wegmans are at the top. And then there's sort of a big gap, and then you get Safeway and Giant and Harris Teeter and Kroger's and many others. And so I think Harris Teeter would like to sort of move up into that space below Whole Foods and Wegmans, but I think there's some opportunities for them, and they're working with us to look at how to get more local produce into their stores. And what we're doing with them is identifying about 6 or 7 stores to run, in essence, a beta test, to see how it goes and what works well, and how do you do the displays, and what kind of items move, and all of that. And then hopefully we'll be able to move that out into their whole, into all of their stores in the region.
Great, thank you. Kind of on the flip side of things, working with the producers, I know you said there's a lot of local nonprofits working in the local food sector. I'm wondering if, first of all, if you guys do any technical assistance or support to farmers, or if you work closely with any other organizations in your area to kind of help getting the farmers up to speed, because I know that's a big challenge with aggregation, is getting farmers to be able to produce the quantity and with the consistency that you mentioned.
That's an excellent question. Yes, we've actually done both, working with 501c3s. In fact, familyfarm.org has a USDA-funded program called Wholesale Success, and it's to help the small producers learn what it takes to be wholesale suppliers. How do you pack it? What are the requirements? What is grade A? What do you need to do to make sure that it's acceptable to wholesale buyers? So we're working with locally the Piedmont Environmental Council to promote that and to offer to not only to our existing suppliers, but also to others who are interested in moving into the wholesale space to do that. The other thing that we do, and we've actually in this particular case done most of it on our own, and that is that GAP certification. GAP stands for Good Agricultural Practices, but certification is it is required by all of our customers now, and more of them are going to, they kind of lenient at this point on it, but I'd say within 2 years, everybody's going to insist that all of their growers are GAP certified. When we started out in 2011, I think the whole state of Virginia had 8 farms that were GAP certified, and now we're up, I think it's somewhere around 80, and I would venture to guess that we're probably responsible for about half of those. And it'll keep growing pretty dramatically. But GAP certification, again, I don't know how much you want me to get into this, but GAP certification is actually somewhat of a no-brainer in that most growers are probably already using good agricultural practices, And what the certification does is just basically says you need to monitor and record and keep track of those things that you're doing. We had one farmer come in and go through the whole GAP certification process, and he was really worried about it. And when they came to his farm for the actual inspection, basically they told him you have only one thing you need to do, and that is to put an outhouse out in your furthest field because it was too far, from where they, from another outhouse. So that was all he had ended up having to do to become GAP certified. But he was doing all of the other things already, and now he knows how to actually keep track of it.
Great.
So I think that the other thing is that we're a blessing to the USDA, and quite frankly, I will say that we were honored that Secretary Vilsack came to visit us at the end of May. He had never seen a local food hub, so since we were so close to DC, he really wanted to come out and see what one was like. So it was a great honor to be able to have him. But one of the things we expressed to him was that as a for-profit business, there are so many things that we would love to get the USDA support for, but we don't qualify because we're a for-profit business. So we're actually looking at a number of other ways that we could collaborate with local 501c3s and work in conjunction with them. So for example, the feasibility study for aggregation of Virginia-made products, we can't get a grant from the USDA to do that feasibility study. But Piedmont Environmental Council is very interested in that for their own purposes. So we figured let's work in collaboration with PEC. It would be a public document so that everybody can see it, but we feel confident that it's valuable for everybody, but we'll be able to actually take advantage of the information that comes out of that. So that's just one way that we work with local 501c3s.
Great, thank you. We'll get one or two more quick questions before we wrap up here. Earlier you mentioned that kind of moving to regional produce didn't really cut it and that people really wanted actual local produce. Could you explain how that kind of showed up in your interactions with your clients, or give us a story that shows the demand for local and not regional?
Well, the story is, the story is we couldn't sell regional in that winter. Some of this is the part where the seasonality comes in. So people do recognize that in the summertime that yes, that's the time to get the squash and the cucumbers and the local lettuce and the tomatoes and the watermelons and all of that come in locally. And so when that season is over, they go back to buying those same things, but I think they're more interested in the fact that they're, at least in this region, in the fact that they're organic more than local. And I think a lot of the customers did also tell us, these are wholesale buyers, all said as well, we can get regional, and I don't think people are going to really pay attention to the fact that there's a sign that says that this is from South Carolina. One of the challenges, it does bring up another interesting issue, though, that for us that we've been struggling with, and that is the whole definition of local. And I think the USDA does have a definition for local. It's, I don't know what it is. I know Chipotle also has its definition of what local is. And, everybody has a slightly different, and all of them are based on mileage. And we think that that's somewhat problematic because ultimately it's not how many miles it is, it's how long it takes to get from the growers to the customers. And so for us, our commitment while we're focused in Virginia and we recognize that there is a geographic value to that, Virginia, from our location, almost anywhere in Virginia is under 200 miles. So if you wanted to do a distance, it's 200 miles. But what we think is more important is that we can get that produce from the field to the customer within 24 hours. And as one of the things that we're all learning is that the nutrient value of produce drops the longer after it's been harvested. And so the best nutrient value comes the quicker it is consumed after it is harvested. So our goal is to get it to the customers as quickly as possible. So what happens is that the large-scale farmers have their own trucks. They deliver to us. Most of them come in at the end of the day, in the evening, deliver to us. It goes into our warehouse. Our staff is at our warehouse somewhere around 3 or 4 in the morning. They're packing their orders, putting them on giant pallets, and then they go out the door around 4:30 or 5 o'clock because we need to get it before the rush hour starts. So literally, it comes in one evening and it goes out the next day. So the turnaround time is what's critical. And that 35,000 square foot warehouse that you saw, I'll bring it back up here. The one that says 34,550 has 136,000 cubic foot refrigeration system inside of that. And the expectation is that'll fill all the way up and empty on a daily basis. And so our ultimate goal and our ultimate capacity for that facility is about $100 million a year. I think I strayed off topic here, but sorry about that.
Great, thank you. You answered a couple other questions I had. In the last minute or two, I just have one kind of final question. Would be what do you feel has the greatest impact on getting local food to communities in a bigger way?
The impact of getting more local food. Well, again, I think that every community needs to look at a model somewhat similar to ours, in order to move the needle. I think, the biggest challenge is the aggregation component of it. It's how do you get efficiently enough local produce into the system? And I know the distributors are doing that. Keeney is well known for, sourcing, but that I'm not sure all of them really know how to handle the relationship with farmers. The farmers again are not easy to deal with, and they do things their own way, and you need to work with it. And I am very fortunate in that my partner, Mark Seal, is a good old boy from Virginia. So I represent the city slicker, he represents the good old boy, country boy, and we make, together a terrific team in that regard. But he's the one that, he has a great Virginia drawl, he speaks their language, he's the one that can sit down with them and talk to them ad nauseum about race cars or whatever they want to talk about. But that relationship, I would say, of all of the relationships, that's the most critical. Customers, that one, yes, is critical also, and keeping them happy is important, is essential. But that's something that I believe most business people get intuitively. What's more difficult to get is how do you deal with farmers, because they're just a different breed. I know there was one question about more about the students' role with getting local food into universities. I just wanted to comment briefly on that. It's just that they demanded it, and I know at UVA, for example, University of Virginia, they shut down the cafeteria because they boycotted it because they weren't moving fast enough on getting local food there. I went with my son to visit a couple of schools in the Midwest, and I was just really impressed with how devoted they were to it. My daughter now goes to Colorado College. phenomenal how much they're doing. And again, I'm incredibly appreciative to them, because that's the first place at an institutional level, as opposed to at an individual level asking their supermarket to do it. You have a group of students forcing an institution to say, we want more local, and then those, in turn, the food service companies who are providing that food to those institutions, turning around and saying, where can we get the produce at a quantity and that is needed for us? And the small systems that were in place simply don't do it. So, we decided we were going to focus on that area that in the chain that we felt had the biggest problem. So maybe I'm biased. Well, I am biased. I'm definitely biased. But I think that's the biggest component to making that happen. I'd like one other comment, and I know we're probably just at the end here, but one of the questions, one of the commitments that we have is towards long-term sustainability. So it's not just about preserving the farmers, but ultimately moving those farmers towards more sustainable practices. And what we found was that it would be very difficult, certainly for me, a Jewish white Anglo-Saxon boy from the city, to tell farmers how to grow and all of that, and it's even difficult for my partner to tell them that. But we felt that once we built their trust and built it over several years, in the ensuing 15, 20, 30 years, we're going to be able to move them towards more sustainable practices, because we're going to be able to tell them that that's what our customers want. So we provide the bridge between urban folks who are demanding more sustainable practices and the farmers, who I think ultimately recognize that it is beneficial to them and the health of their families, the health of their soil, and the health of their and to their ability to make money, and to shift to more sustainable practices.
Great. Well, thank you, Jim. We are just out of time here, and I want to really thank you for sharing with us today, and thanks to all the folks who asked questions. Jim has graciously agreed to answer any more questions anyone has via email, and Jim's contact information will come in an email from Mikkel after the webinar. Just as a reminder, after each webinar, we will email everyone who registered a link to the call audio, the presentation materials, and a copy of the public chat window, and watch for an email from Mikkel over the next few days with all of that. You can also purchase past recordings of our webinars at our website, bealocalist.org/webinars. And shortly after this call, you will receive an email or be directed directly to a short survey about this particular webinar. We really value your feedback, and we use this survey to improve our webinars and hear from you about the topics that you want to see. So just to finish up, huge thanks to Jim Epstein for sharing his time and expertise today, and to all of you on the call for your great questions and for being with us. And we hope to see you again soon. Thanks, Jim, and thanks, everyone.
Thank you.